Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 84. I'm Enigmus, and today, if you saw the build series we did on the Manta heavy assault hover vessel, this might be interesting to you. We're on Masperon in this particular segment here, and I was cruising around. I had a couple of bases that I had already hit with my small vessel. I basically bombed the hell out of them, got rid of most of the turrets, if not all of them. One was a Xenu support base, the other was a Xenu drone base. And I decided that I would go back to those two now that I had a working hover vessel with turrets that could defend itself, and clean them out, get all the loot. Hopefully get some of the auto miner cores that we needed to make a mining vessel at some point in the future. And so I went to the first one, and then I was on my way after I cleared that out to the second one, and I came across this, hiding in this little valley in between the two. This is a Xenu fortress, and you can see, possibly, it's dark, I know, there's not much that I can do about that unfortunately, but the whole thing is basically, it's got a square wall all the way around the outside, and all along this wall is all turrets. It's absolutely loaded with turrets. Now fortunately, I was able to avoid a lot of the headache that would have come along with trying to destroy something like this. And you can see, after I got rid of those first two rows, the artillery has been changed since the last time I used it. It's now got quite a heavy-duty AoE component to it, and it's making an absolute mess of this place. It's just knocking down not only the turrets, but the structures around them with kind of a ferocity that I wasn't expecting, and you can see the end result is it's just kind of a wasteland that we're turning this place into. Unfortunately, in order to get the back two rows, I had to move closer, and this was a great opportunity for you guys to see what this thing looks like when it starts shooting at you when half of its turrets have been destroyed. It's not a fun place to be. Now, it's worth pointing out that there's only a couple of turrets right now that can actually shoot at me. The rest are there, they're present, but they're behind obstacles, which is why they aren't shooting. When I first came across this base, I wasn't expecting to find anything, so I came barreling around a corner, and the end result was an absolute disaster. It was a very painful kind of adventure that I ended up having to reload from it because the front end of my ship was absolutely mashed to oblivion. Just a lot of turrets. So this ended up being sort of the final challenge, the say goodbye to Masperon kind of fight, which, as you can see, once we get properly positioned and we start using the artillery, it's not much of a fight, really. It's just us bombing the hell out of it from as far away as we can possibly be so that the turrets don't fire back, and we can sort of have our way with the station without having to worry too much about replacing big chunks of our ship by the time that we're done. So I've tried to, cut this back because it was a time-consuming process to clear all of these turrets. So I trimmed it down in the hopes that you guys would first be able to see what we were starting with, what we were up against, and now you can see just all of the destroyed blocks around this place. It doesn't look like it's a design anymore, because it's not. It's just rubble for all practical intents and purposes. By the time we get all of the turrets off of here, we actually were fortunate to be in a good position. We could get all of them from where we are now. I decided to, close in, and of course we have to clear out the loot and anything else that we might come across that would be interesting. But at the same time, I don't really know what to expect, because I've never really decimated the surface of a base like this before. So obviously we need to watch out for spawners, and we need to watch out for the bad guys that are spawned by the spawners. I wasn't expecting the role of turrets, auto turrets, like the little sentry turrets that you find inside the structures, to be what it was in this case. It was one of those situations where we start off here, and I wasn't even sure if the core of the base was still intact, and that's why I switched to the multi-tool and give one of those barrels a couple of shots just to see if that would be enough to remove it. But because it wasn't, we can sort of figure out for ourselves that the core is still intact somewhere. We've got this big golem guy. These golems are really, really intimidating, but given the fact that they can't jump so well, they're really not that difficult to deal with in a situation like this, because we've got the benefit of terrain. We can, go above it, put ourselves in a position where it absolutely cannot reach us, and then just sort of make a mess of it, and if we wanted to, possibly loot it. But in this case, I learned something. When they jump into a little hole like that, look at the turret, the giant turret just to the right of where I'm looking now. I totally didn't see it because the gun was blocking it until it started to move, and then I had to move very quickly or I was going to die. When the golems fall in those little holes, they get stuck. They're an easy target, but then they fall backwards when they die, and you can't loot them from their feet. You don't get the prompt to open them as a container when they're in that situation, and we can't really destroy the block or remove it until we get rid of the core. So we weren't able to loot the golem, which is not that big of a deal. Once you get into a situation where you're picking up lots of different components, like you get to the robots and the golems and turrets and things like that, where when you destroy them, you get a lot of the base components that you would make from ingots. When you get to that situation where you're getting a lot of those, inventory fills up really, really quickly. It's almost to the point where I feel like there are too many components being handed out for the amount of inventory space that we get. But you see here, you walk into a room and you're kind of taking stock. I honestly, I don't know if it's a case where I've forgotten how dangerous these guys can be, or if they've been buffed, or if something has been changed in a way that makes it so that you really just have to be super careful about your exposure to these guys. You can see I'm using the shotgun, and I have to switch because the guy who's shooting at me is all the way across this large room. But fortunately, when you start shooting things with the assault rifle, they recoil every time you hit them. They kind of do a little stagger backwards, and you can basically shut down their damage outputs from any range by doing that, which is very, very handy, because I'm finding I don't want to be too quick to use a word like inconsistent, because sometimes it's seen as a negative word when describing game systems, but there are times when I feel like I'm taking a lot of punishment, but my health isn't really moving. And then there are other times where I feel like I took just a couple of hits and my health bar is almost gone. And I understand that there are different kinds of weapons at play. The Xenu guys have, some of them have chain guns. Some of them, some of the turrets, for example, have 50 caliber rounds that you get from them. We can assume that they're firing 50 caliber rounds at you. And those are the kinds of things where we come across and say, okay, it makes sense that those guys are making a real mess of us. But in the grand scheme of things, we went through a lot of health packs in here. And it's just because, you see there's the little sentry turret. And what I wasn't expecting from this situation is that there would be another sentry turret right beside it that we just didn't see because we didn't come far enough forward. So I'm thinking, okay, well, we got that sentry turret, the sneaky bugger. So we're going to focus on what's going on down here, which happens to be another base-sized turret. Not aware that behind me is another sentry turret, and all it would take is for me to take a few steps to the right, and it would be making an absolute mess of me, and I would be having a hard time figuring out where the hell it was coming from because I didn't properly clear my corner, and I just assumed that everything was clear. You see this guy here, the little bugger, could have made a real mess of me, but fortunately, we kind of avoided it. The turrets themselves, these big fat ones that we would normally destroy with one of our own ships, they warrant things like rocket launchers, is really what I should have for this. And it's not difficult to get a rocket launcher. I'm sure I have one in a base or in a ship somewhere tucked away, and I think I've even got some rockets that I can use to shoot out of it. But I didn't bring any with me because I was concerned about inventory space. Really, it probably would have made this whole process a lot easier because I'm going through a ton of ammo trying to get this turret down, and it's not interested. It could care less. It's taking all the hits, and I'm trying to find like, maybe there's a spot where I can hit it where it's weaker than the other spots and it will die faster, sort of like a headshot, but on a turret? No, I didn't find anything like that. So I just kept shooting it until it exploded. And I kind of resented having to spend so much ammo to do it, but it's my own fault for not bringing a rocket launcher. You can see I switched from the assault rifle to the pistol because it's got 50 caliber rounds. It's actually more damaging than a person might expect just from looking at it. And then we kept pushing down. The whole thing here is carefully thoughtfully moving down, because I had a feeling that that's where we would find the core, would be in the lower levels, which wound up being the case. But more importantly, that's usually where you'll find the purple barrels and the red barrels and the really good loot containers. So I figured once we got to the bottom and we got rid of the core, that would be a pretty good indication that we'd cleared out most of the base at least. And then we could do another pass and, you know, clear out what we can of the bad guys. Hopefully loot some more assault rifle ammunition, because it's easier than making it. And we found these robot guys, which is great, because it gives us more of the components that we would normally make from ingots and fills up our inventory very quickly. Shotgun is really good for these guys, I've found. Shotgun is good for anything where you can stand to get close enough to it to get the full benefit out of it. But you can see here, this guy is just loaded with stuff, so I take his ammunition, the 50 caliber ammunition, and off we go. This is where things got really bizarre, because as you can see, we've got our capital vessel that we've landed on the ground. We've got the ramp down, and I'm feeling pretty confident that our hover vessel will fit inside, even if only barely. But once we start to get its nose in, it takes a little bit of work. You can see it, the door starts misbehaving, and it just reminded me of a mouth chomping down on our hover vessel as we're trying to get it in place. You have to remember, when you're manually opening and closing the door, or if it's automatically doing it as part of the behaviors that are supposed to happen, it's fairly slow going up and down. But for whatever reason, when you start feeding it something, it just goes absolutely apeshit, and it's really difficult at that point to have any say whatsoever in where your ship is. Look at this. Where your ship is going to end up going. It chewed us up and spit us out, literally, and there's nothing we can do about it. I actually have our small vessel, the Hammerhead, that we made relatively recently, over on the other side. It was too big to fit in the hangar door, so it's actually, you'll see it probably as we're flying around in the capital vessel. It's latched onto the back end of the hangar. It's not actually in the hangar. And then we get this situation here where it basically chews us up. Now the ship is sideways, and that big black thing is actually the hangar door inside our ship that we can now open from inside our ship and try and get back up to the pilot seat, so we can hopefully set the ship flat and secure it for the voyage. One thing that I found is that the landing pads for the hover vessel didn't want to work. They didn't want to latch onto the ship, which could have been a design failing on my part. They may have to be the lowest piece on the ship in order for them to latch, where I've got them in this particular situation. They're basically on the same level as the hover engines and the boosters. So maybe I need to have put them down a little bit farther in order to make that work. But all I know now is that either remaining on the surface of Masperon or somewhere in orbit of Masperon is the Manta, and it basically got left behind, because you'd see, we removed the door as the final solution to try and get it into the ship. But once we got it into the ship and it looked like it was in a good spot, we couldn't latch the docking pads. So I would suspect, if it even got off the ground, that when we went into hyperspace to jump to the next system, it got left behind. One of the two. All I know is when we got to the next system, it wasn't in the hangar anymore. You can see, we just put it in the hangar. It fits fairly well, but that was the end of that. I never really checked. You can see now we're just getting off the planet, getting out of orbit, making the targeting Oskatune, or however you want to pronounce that, because it seemed like a good place to go when you've got a good, powerful hover vessel, because it's all water and small islands. But of course, by the time we get there, we no longer have a hover vessel. So at some point, we're going to have to come back and recover it, not just because it's a brand new ship and we want it back, but because it's actually got a lot of stuff in its inventory that we got from scavenging here, and also all of the bases that we cleaned out. We had this stuff there. We just put it into the containers in the hover vessel, and we never bothered to unload them. So it's got a lot of materials that went into making the ship itself, plus a lot of stuff in the containers that we would like to have back. But in the meantime, what we're looking at now is going to be our home base for the next little while. This is Oskatune. We were here once before when we needed iron. Go figure. We've been to this planet when we needed iron, now for the second time. And in this case, there's only one iron deposit left on the entire planet. But it's easy to get around. It's a nice change. It's almost like a holiday destination relative to Masperon. It's not crazy noisy with things howling and chomping in the background. And it's going to be a good spot for us, I think, because it'll be easy to build a base that will offer some protection from drones and things like that. You know what? Drones attacking ships as you're building them. So we'll have that. But there you can see, just in the bottom right, you might see it again, the small vessel dangling out the back of the right hangar. Because it was, it wouldn't fit. Even if I took off the wings being used as fins, it wouldn't fit. But here, the only goal that I really had was to find that, first of all, check the planet list of available resources to find if there was any more iron left. And when it said there was one, I just wanted to find that deposit and land near there so that we can set up an auto miner and just get as much iron out of it as we possibly can. We have enough materials to get us started with the two major projects that we're going to be looking at in the next little while. The first is going to be setting up a base, like I say, to offer us a little bit of protection so drones aren't attacking us while we're building stuff. And then we're going to be mothballing our current capital vessel and replacing it with a brand new one. How that's going to work in terms of destroying this one and building the other, I don't know. I've got, I think, 3 stacks of capital vessel sized combat steel blocks to get us started. I won't necessarily have to start tearing down our current capital vessel to make it, but eventually that's where we're going to end up. The downside, of course, is that we've got this capital vessel that's got way more guns than the game allows, and by removing them, we will not be able to put them back. That's the sheer firepower of the Azure Valkyrie is not going to be matched by the new vessel, but that's okay because it's a balancing thing, and it's going to be a more useful blueprint to people when we build a new capital vessel if it doesn't exceed the gun allowances. So this wound up being where we decided to land the ship. This is where we're going to be building our base because the iron deposit is just a short run away from here. Set it down. The small vessel is still just dangling off the back end. I found that amusing, and what really kind of stuck out for me is that when you walk up to that small vessel on the ground, it seems quite large, but when you look at it in the scale of things right next to the capital vessel, or in this case, hanging off of it, it looks pretty tiny. So that was kind of an eye-opening thing in terms of the size and the scope of the capital vessel. But in this case, right here is the iron deposit, so right here is where we're going to put our auto miner. I didn't bring any fuel with me to put in the auto miner, so we'll have to come back and do that. Very important to have this thing up and running as soon as possible. We're also going to get some hydrogen, get that established so that we can start making hydrogen fuel tanks. I've got a lot of promethium that I've accumulated both in raw form and also in the pellet form that it refines into. So for fuel and things to keep things going, that's not going to be an issue. It's just the raw materials to make everything we need. I don't know why we've got the yellow squares on the top of the water. I think it's probably just lingering sort of artifact from the changes that were recently made to the game, and they'll get fixed soon enough because right now they just look like pools full of urine waiting for us to explore them. Having said all that, you can see just the very beginnings now of the base that we're going to be making here. The next episode is going to be taking a look at what we did here with regards to the base and how we're getting set up to do the capital vessel that we're going to be building, and probably a look at the beginnings of the capital vessel. We're going to be doing another mini-series for the capital vessel. It's going to be similar in some ways to the format that we used for the hover vessel, but we're going to cut out even more. So it's going to be less time spent working and reworking things, and more just kind of showing you the process of building the final stages as we come across them. So if we do something 3 times before we're happy with it, you'll see the last time, unless we're reworking it sometime down the line, in which case you'll have to watch it again. Sorry. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information box below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.